Hi all, I have another interesting game to show you today, the Grand Chess or Rapid. So this is in round 3, Wesley against MVL, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Let's see this game, Knight F3. The time limit, I believe, is 25 minutes each with a 10-second delay from move 1. So MVL playing black played C5, Wesley played B3 here, B6, Bishop B2, Bishop B7, C4, Knight F6, G3, G6. Both players are simply fianchetting the bishops, but now White takes up the challenge in fracturing Black's pawn structure. This may be useful to try and increase control of the D5 square. And funny enough, here White positively invites the same for Black to do. Bishop takes F3, and Black takes up White on that. So both sides inflicting these double pawns, and both sides potentially have got strong outposts. White on D5, Black on D4 now. You can see when these fianchettoed bishops exert more pressure on this central square for both sides, we'll have an interesting situation with symmetrical logic to some extent. Bishop G2, Bishop G7. We see here Queen E7, Queen E2 check, King F8. Queen E7 for Black should be fine, but Black doesn't mind, MVL doesn't mind displacing his king here. White castles F5, F4, very symmetrical. Bishop F6, and you might think, well, how can anything exciting happen from here? Let's have a look. There is something already intriguing. Black is taking time to restore his king into a more normal looking position, but it seems fine that White has a lock on D5 and Black on D4. Very symmetrical logic so far. We see here Queen D3, Rook C8, Rook E3, and there's an idea now that White has slightly more pressure on Black despite the symmetry. If White can double rooks, for example, then it seems uncomfortable on the E file. We see Knight D4, and now this Knight's challenged with Knight B5. It seems technically Black could consider a kind of temporary pawn sack here by taking on B5. He actually played A6, but let's have a quick look at this forcing possibility of playing here Bishop D4 now and D5, let's say. If White tries to win the D pawn, Black could sack the D pawn, and it kind of backfires on White's D pawn. We get a situation like this, which should be an even position, where basically, essentially what's happened is both sides have dissolved their central pawns. It should be even here. So this is interesting as well now. A6, Knight takes, Bishop takes, Rook E2. But there is a counterpart difference here. Although Black's bishop's good and could be as good as White's on D5, the rooks are in a better position to control that E file. But also here, now, anyway, Black's immediately parrying the E file. The key thing about this position right now is that after Queen takes E2 here, White does control the E file for a moment, but White's queen can actually enter on light squares, and Black can't really do the same here very easily. That's a very, very big difference of the position. You can imagine if this bishop was on G7 just like this bishop, then the queen could come in, say, to B2, but White can do that to Black without the reverse being true here. We see D6, Queen E7. This is another route into Black's position as well, just Queen E7 directly. So entering into the position seems a bit unpleasant, but Black plays now after Queen B7, which looks to build up pressure with Bishop D5, for example. Black is also maybe concerned about this A pawn. He moves that and allows Bishop D5. And we see that, well, the natural response would seem to fail Rook C7 because of that B pawn. But guess what Black plays anyway? And can you work out why? So what does Black do about F7? This seems to be a very resourceful move from MVL, and he is one of the strongest in my view, tactical super GMs going. So he played this move in respect of f7. I wonder if you can guess it. You might want to pause the video and work out some concrete variations. He sets what seems to be a very devious trap indeed. He plays rook c7. Now, what would be the problem with queen takes b6? Does it have any downside at all? Queen takes b6, would you consider? If we just snap off that pawn. As I say, I think this is... Who's being trapped here, though? The trapper or the counter-trapper? White did actually play queen takes b6, and black's idea was, guess what here? Okay, rook e7 hits e1 and hits the queen. It's a double attack on the queen and e1. Yeah. And the game ended here. Or did it? Or did it? Okay. No, white to play in this position. He had foreseen this, actually. Rook takes e7. Rook takes e7. And, yeah, white is on f7, which is not just f7, it's f6 as well with check. If black... He did take the queen. And now we have rook takes f7. And before we go into that, maybe black is still fine on queen takes e7, threatening things like queen e1. So say king f1, queen d8. This looks to be very fortressy. Even though white's are pawn up, I don't see how white can make any progress here very easily. If you check this with engines, the evaluation is not going to change, even though it's like +1 or something. It's not going to change because that implies often a fortressy type position. So it's just technically a pawn up, but can you actually realize anything from this? It's very difficult to imagine. But in the game, we do have a severe imbalance being created because black didn't go in for this. Black actually played queen takes b6 and allows white to scoop up now f7 and f6 after the check first. Wesley now takes on f6, and there's pressure on black here, quite a lot of pressure. We have queen b4. It's difficult to find a constructive plan for black. I'll show you a backfire with a4. White can consolidate here. It doesn't matter about the structural damage here. Check, check, and rook a8, and that a pawn is going to be a killer as an example. It's an example variation. There's only a little bit of play. Black it gets temporary threats of queen h5 that can basically be extinguished tactically. Black can never take here because of the check. We have this position, and rook h4 is the most elegant way to deal with that. This pawn's just queening. So this a4, I just wanted to satisfy myself. This structural damage possibility doesn't do anything. And if that's the case, what is the black queen doing here all by herself in this position? White could potentially play things like h4, h5 and inflict structural damage. And maybe even bring the king up later to support the rook and the bishop to do more damage. So black tries to be active. Queen b4 here. And gives up, the d6 pawn for d2. Rook c6. Now here, black has to be very careful. This rook and bishop is quite a powerful team in this position because that bishop on d5 is a very, very nice central bishop. It seems black technically should play queen takes a2. This might be the best try. He didn't do this. I'll give you a variation now where white has this past c pawn. And basically, I believe eventually the c-pawn, with absolute best play, could be herded through. You can see the PGN I'll give in the description of the video for a line there. Okay, so that is still dangerous for black. It's only white that has the longer term prospects. So in the game, actually, we see queen d4, but this is very bleak now. After king g2, king g7, check, we have h4, h5, a4, and black, now his king actually can't move. Look at that bishop stopping the king move. He's run out of pawn moves. The pawns are totally exhausted. No candidate moves from them. And once the queen moves, c5 drops off. So I'll give you an example. Queen c3, take on c5, and then take on a5. And we've got two passed pawns now. And this is going to be, for example, like this, pretty decisive after a5. Yeah, so I thought this was quite an interesting game with this amazing possibility that occurred during the actual game. This trap that was kind of set, but a counter trap. It was maybe it was the trap was by white setting that to give up his queen for rook and bishop, with the better prospects of doing something later after that. So a kind of positional queen sack, but not really. It was quite a lot of material, yeah, to get for the queen. So I hope you got something from this. It was quite a fascinating encounter, I thought. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much. I'll take you back to the final position. So the final position was a4. Thanks again.